Good morning. It's weekdays after Easter, except if you know the church calendar, you know that there are 8 weeks of Easter. So what we thought is that we would continue to have some devotional thoughts and scriptures on these 8 weeks of Easter and continue to look at what the scriptures say about the cross and the resurrection of Jesus. It's interesting to see how much, particularly the New Testament, but more so the Scriptures, the entire Bible, focus on the cross and resurrection of Jesus. What I mean is the Old Testament has prophecy regarding Israel's future, and tied to that is the death of the Messiah. And even though the resurrection is thought to be something at the end, that's there in the prophets' messages as well. But when you get to the New Testament, there's no doubt that the central event for Jesus is his death and resurrection. And I'll talk about those as two parts of a single event. Let me just talk about this a little bit, even statistically. Only halfway through Matthew and Mark's Gospels, Jesus begins to talk about his death and his resurrection. In Luke's Gospel, as early as chapter 9, Jesus turns his attention to go to Jerusalem, and we know there he'll die on a cross. In John's Gospel, half of that Gospel, nearly half of it, is devoted to a single week in Jesus' life, everything from the triumphal entry into Jerusalem through Good Friday and Jesus' resurrection. Now, just a little bit on percentages. More than 25% of Matthew covers the final week. About 33% or so of Mark's Gospel covers that. 25% of Luke, and as I mentioned, nearly half of John. So suffice it to say, the focal point of the Gospels is the cross and the resurrection of Jesus. Now, we're not suggesting that the other things in the Gospels aren't important. There are other critical things because Christ's death and resurrection fits into that whole story about Jesus. Maybe I could suggest that the other things fit under a couple of headings. Number one, who is Jesus? And we've talked about that question a lot. And then what is Jesus doing? And of course, he is establishing, he's preaching, he's bringing the kingdom. But the point is, the only way the identity of Jesus has any lasting significance for us, the only way his kingdom will truly be established and endure is through his crucifixion and then his bodily resurrection. So that one event is like something that puts a beautiful painting into focus, or it's like the work of an architect that designs a building to draw attention to what he wants to be the centerpiece. The centerpiece of the whole gospel story is Christ's death and his resurrection. So what we want to talk about in these coming weeks is what's the significance of Christ's death and resurrection? What's the impact or the intended impact of that event to be for you and me? And I will suggest that the remainder of the New Testament, certainly beyond the book of Acts, but including the book of Acts, the point is to talk about what Christ's death and resurrection mean. In fact, I would suggest that the letters of Paul and Peter and John and the others are written to talk about how the cross and resurrection of Jesus should impact us as a community of believers and should impact our lives daily as Christians. So I'll mention 3 things under that suggested impact, just as a suggestion of how we might go with this. How does the death and resurrection of Jesus affect my understanding of the Bible and its message? What does the death and resurrection of Jesus say to me about expectations regarding the future? And then, as I mentioned before, how should Christ's death and resurrection impact my life on a daily basis? And basically this much, what we'll see over the next 7 weeks is that everything in my life should be shaped, should be impacted, should be adjusted on the basis of Christ's death and resurrection. It should teach me and guide me in what it means to know Jesus. Let me mention just two passages out of the New Testament. I won't comment on these, just read them. But I think these two passages, both of them out of 2 Corinthians, say something about the impact of Christ's death and resurrection for us. And the first one is 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6. And Paul says this to those Christians there at Corinth. For God, who said, "Let there be light," in the darkness, has made this light shine in our hearts so we could know the glory of God that is seen in the face of Jesus Christ. And we now have this light shining in our hearts. And then in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18, hear this verse. So all of us who have had that veil removed can see and reflect the glory of the Lord. And the Lord, who is the Spirit, makes us more and more like him as we are changed into his glorious image. So I'll just say at this point, looking ahead, that as we study and contemplate and understand and embrace the meaning of the cross and resurrection of Jesus, it transforms us. It makes us more like Christ. Amen. God bless you.